For analysis of 2009, we turn to Glenn Greenwald, a constitutional law attorney and political and legal blogger for Salon.com, joining us now on the telephone. Glenn, welcome to Democracy Now! Beginning in Afghanistan today. We know the U.S. Contractors, CIA employees who were killed, 8 of them, 4 Canadian troops, and the first Canadian journalist killed in Afghanistan, Michelle Lang, for the Calgary Herald. It's always much tougher to find out exactly how many Afghans have died. Talk about this war on this last day of 2009.
Well, I think in a lot of ways it's a very kind of morbid, though powerful symbol of what it is that we're doing, which is we continue to, every time we are targeted with some sort of terrorist attack, we seem to respond by escalating. And there's this sense that the Obama administration is less bellicose and less committed to warmongering than the Bush administration was. And although that may be true on several levels, as Juan just suggested before I came on, we are escalating our military presence and our aggression in numerous parts of the world, Afghanistan being only one of those cases. And when we do that, not only can we expect that we are going to suffer the kinds of casualties that you just described, but we're going to be bringing the kinds of deaths not only to Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters, but also to civilians, as just happened as well, according to Afghan officials, exactly the kind of death to civilians and to Muslims that cause and exacerbate the very threat that we're purportedly trying to undermine. And so what we're doing is we're bringing this constant cycle where we bring death to their part of the world. They then try and bring more death to our part of the world, as we saw with the attempted terrorist attack on the Northwest jet. And we continue to respond by doing exactly that, which perpetuates the cycle. And I think the multiple horrible incidents over the past 24 hours in Afghanistan symbolizes what it is that we're doing.
And Glenn, what about the situation in Yemen? We have the situation of this Christmas Day attempted bombing, apparently coming out of Yemen, and yet the American people are not well aware of how deeply already the United States is involved in this new front in Yemen, in the fight against the so-called war on terror.
Well, first of all, I think that's the critical point, is that what this really is a covert war. The New York Times called it a covert front in the terror war, whatever you want to call it, a front in the ongoing war or a new war. The reality is that we're involved in a war in a new country that most Americans had never even thought about or heard of, let alone given thought to whether we should be involved in war there. And when you count the number of countries, of Muslim countries, where we're actively engaged in some kind of warfare, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, and now Yemen, that's 5 different Muslim countries where we are either occupying, invading, or bombing, and that's to say nothing of the conflicts that our primary client state in the Middle East, Israel, has with a whole bunch of other Muslim countries and the other Muslim countries that we're threatening, such as Iran. So we are expanding the wars and aggression in the Muslim world. Yemen is a prime example. And specifically with regard to Yemen, if you talk to virtually any expert in that country, and I interviewed one at Princeton last week, across the political spectrum, what they will say is that when we shoot missiles into various sites in Yemen and kill civilians, as we did 8 days ago, and there's no question that, although there's some question about what exactly our involvement was, because it's a covert war, there's no question we were involved heavily and enabled the attack. When we kill civilians or shoot missiles or drop Hellfire missiles into that country, and when we prop up the dictatorial oppressive regime that runs that country, we are unquestionably doing exactly that which al-Qaeda could wish for. We are helping al-Qaeda convert the population and bringing greater and greater sympathy to the cause of Islamic radicalism. And so here you saw a plot that quite likely had something to do with Yemen, and obviously there's a connection between what we are doing in Yemen in terms of our military assaults and interfering in their country and propping up an oppressive regime, and the desire on the part of people of that country to attack us, and the willingness on the part of the population, not just al-Qaeda, but the normal population, to be supportive of those efforts because they perceive that we are bringing death to their country, and it's only fair that they return those actions.
And what does this mean, Glenn Greenwald, for Guantanamo prisoners from Yemen being returned there? What is it? The ones left at Guantanamo, about half of them are from Yemen?
Yes, about half. There's roughly 200 prisoners currently at Guantanamo, and 90 of them are from Yemen, and that's been one of the primary obstacles, is that the government, the Obama administration, and before then the Bush administration, has not wanted to release any of the detainees to Yemen because they don't trust the Yemeni government to safeguard those detainees. There was, in 2003, a prison break in Yemen where the current leaders of al-Qaeda in Yemen escaped, and that's what really led to the revitalization of Yemen. The problem is that by holding 90 people from Yemen in Guantanamo without charges of any kind indefinitely, and many of whom are clearly innocent and have done nothing wrong, that too exacerbates the anti-American anger and hostility that fuels terrorism. It's a huge propaganda tool for al-Qaeda as well. And to their credit, the Obama administration actually just 2 weeks ago released 6 Yemeni detainees back to Yemen in an attempt to close Guantanamo on the ground that keeping Guantanamo open is more threatening and more dangerous than releasing these detainees back to Guantanamo, and yet back to Yemen. And yet what you see is the normal bipartisan reaction. You saw people like Lindsey Graham and Joe Lieberman, but also Dianne Feinstein, immediately pipe up and demand that no more detainees be released to Yemen, even though these are people who are guilty of nothing, have never been charged with any crime, and against whom there's no evidence. And that's another perfect example of how the policies that we're pursuing in the name of fighting terrorism are fueling that very threat.
And Glenn, another area where the Obama administration has expanded military activity, obviously to Pakistan, in the border areas of Pakistan, yet Pakistan is continuing to witness almost daily attacks within its country by militants.
Well, this is, I think, very similar to what we just discussed in terms of what we're doing in the Muslim world generally, and specifically the counterproductive conduct that we're pursuing in Yemen. I mean, the myth from the beginning has been that there is a certain group of intrinsically evil people called the terrorists, and the key to beating them is to just kill them all. And once you kill them all with bombs and other air attacks and the like, or if you lock them up forever, once you do that to the finite group known as the terrorists, there will be no more terrorists, and we will have won the war on terror. And that's why we've relied continuously and increasingly on acts of violence, with the idea that if we're just going to eradicate the terrorists. And of course, what we actually have been doing over the last 9 years, and we don't ever learn our lesson, is we're actually expanding the pool of terrorists. We're increasing rapidly the number of people who are sympathetic to Islamic radicalism and who are so angry at us that they're not only willing to kill innocent civilians, but they're willing to give up their own lives to do it. And if you look at all kinds of sources, you can go back to a 2004 task force that Donald Rumsfeld appointed. You can look at what David Rode, the New York Times reporter who was kidnapped by the Taliban and held captive for 8 months, said. You can look at the British reporter Johan Hari, who interviewed ex-jihadists. All of this evidence proves that the more we engage in these kind of air attacks in Muslim areas, and that certainly includes in these tribal regions of Pakistan, the more civilians we kill, the more terrorists we create. And we've certainly, there almost certainly are far more terrorists now, people willing to do violence against us, than there were 9 years ago as a result of what we're doing. And this covert action in Pakistan, it too is a covert war. There's no congressional authorization for it. There's virtually no discussion of it by government officials. It's having the same effect as our bombing campaigns in Yemen.
Glenn Greenwald, talk about the media coverage of the wars, and also you wrote interesting piece about the New York Times coverage of Sami al-Hajj, the Al Jazeera reporter who was held at Guantanamo for about 6 years and then released without charge.
Well, this is what I find actually most interesting and most and the most significant aspect of all of this is it's generally assumed that there's a significant disparity between how we as Americans or Westerners perceive of all of these events and how the Muslim world perceives of these events. And that is true. There is a very grave disparity.